In response to pressures and some conflicts in Boston's housing market, the city is expanding services for tenants and landlords. To bring us up to date is the Senior Program Manager for the Office of Housing Stability in the Department of Neighborhood Development, Katherine Brady. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Okay, first of all, one of the things this office hinges on is some legislation that's going to be decided at the State House, and talk about why that is so important.
The legislation really is important because it attacks anti-displacement policies from a number of different angles. We have the Jim Brooks legislative proposal that would help inform tenants of their rights. We have the right to counsel that once tenants know they have their rights, would have attorneys actually help them implement and put into place those rights. And we also have a right to purchase bill that would give tenants a place at the table if their unit is sold in foreclosure or by short sale.
Well, one thing I'm sure your office has had a certain amount of experience with already is people call you up and say, you know, there's a new owner of the property I'm in. I've been here for a while. I've been paying the rent. Now I get an eviction notice. They think maybe they have to move out right away. So explain, what should they do?
What they should do is contact our office is one thing they can do, or they can contact legal service organizations. And so what we've done is, if people find themselves in that situation, if we tried to collect that information for folks to try to give them a guide on what they can do if they receive a notice to quit, whether it's because their building is sold or because they couldn't pay their rent. So we have an eviction guide that is available online and in print form that can help them walk through what their options are if they receive a no-fault notice to quit or a non-payment notice to quit. So they can know what they could negotiate, what legal resources might be available, or what financial resources might be available depending on their circumstance.
Well, if the landlord doesn't even allege there's a problem, like a no-fault notice, how much time does the tenant have?
Well, by law, they have to give them at least a 30-day notice to quit, but then they'd have to start the court eviction process. And once they enter the court eviction process, in a no-fault eviction, they could ask the judge for more time. And if they're elderly or disabled, they could ask for up to 1 year. But even families could ask for up to 6 months at the judge's discretion. So it's not over just because they've received the notice to quit. So they should understand how much time they could ask for, and they could play out the eviction process in court to ask for that. Or they could use that to negotiate maybe cash for keys with the landlord if they know there's somewhere else that they'd be interested in moving on to, but would need some sort of rental assistance to get started in a new place.
Of course, let's say on the other end here, you have a landlord who buys a property. It hadn't changed hands in a long time. Rents were fairly low, and the landlord knows maybe from the get-go that rents like that aren't going to be able to be enough to pay off the mortgage. So what can the new landlord do about that?
They may need to raise the rent, right, to make it meet, but they could talk with the tenants. Maybe there's a staggered increase that they could afford, something that's incremental over time that they could both work on. It may be that depending on the tenant's income, that some type of rent increase that's fairly substantial isn't something they could sustain in the long term, but they could talk to our office or other housing search agencies about whether they would qualify for certain housing programs. I think some people are surprised to find out what housing programs they may qualify for, and while those might not be an instant answer to the problem, it can be part of a long-term solution to help them find a sustainable housing option.
What you also do at the office is mediation. Anything you can say about how that helps?
I think it helps because it gives people an opportunity to resolve their disputes outside of the court process, which can save court costs. It can save, emotional stress for folks, and it also means that the parties are in control of the outcome. There's certainty involved in that. So with that landlord who just bought the new building, instead of going to court, if they approached and went through a mediation process, they don't know what that judge might give in terms of additional time for the tenant to move out. And neither does the tenant, but they both can agree on, if they decide that a move out is the way it's going to go, they can agree on 5 months, or they could agree on 6 months, or they could agree on something else and a payment. And then they control the outcome. And I think there's an empowerment in that.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Kate Brady from the Office of Housing Stability. Kate, what also happens is sometimes people, the renters do have to look for another place to live, and I guess there are some ways you can help with that?
Yeah, well, we do manage the city's Metro List, which is a clearinghouse of affordable housing opportunities. So we can connect people with that, and that's available online, and we also send out a newsletter every week. But for folks who need a more intensive housing search process, we do have housing search workshops that we can connect folks to, and we have housing crisis coordinators who also can do housing search.
You've also worked in some cases where tenants had a rental subsidy and the landlord wanted to move them out. What did you do in those situations?
When they have a rental subsidy, a lot of times, we do have housing court assistance programs that can work with them if it's a non-payment to help them work out that arrearage. Sometimes, it may be a behavioral issue, and we can work with them to say, are there certain behaviors that we can agree to, that if the tenant is able to abide by those rules, then we can keep them housed. So we attempt to work with solutions on them about that. But we also try to not only work with the tenants to see how we can make the tenancy work, but we know in the case of subsidized housing that these are housing providers who want to provide housing to lower income or moderate income tenants, and that's their business. And they have an interest too in keeping those folks housed because that's their mission, and it's expensive to evict folks. So we also work with them to help provide them with resources and to listen to them on what tools they may need to help keep vulnerable tenants housed.
One other thing the mayor has been trying to do through some of these reforms around housing stabilization is to get a comprehensive inventory of places where evictions are taking place, or maybe even the owners doing it. Why is that so important?
It's important because it allows us to understand where evictions are occurring and why it's occurring so that we can outreach to people who are at risk. Right now, without knowing where eviction is occurring for sure, we can put information online, we can have the office available, but we have to depend in large part on people coming to us. We can't really reach them. And if we can't reach them, then they might not know that we exist. They might not know that these rights can be asserted. So if we know that evictions are occurring in a certain neighborhood, or we know in real time that someone has received a notice to quit, then we can reach out to them and we can say, hey, there are these legal resources or financial resources and other resources that can help you. So it really allows us to have a meaningful and timely intervention.
We should mention that if people want some help or at least some more information, you've got a website they can go to?
Absolutely. They can go to our website, which is www.boston.gov/housing stability.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Kate Brady from the Office of Housing Stability.